And we are live. So hi everybody. This is the 5th of October 2022 Delivery System Sync and Demo. We have an item in the discussion and it's around our Q4 OKRs. Yesterday we opened an issue with Amy where we decided to have one group OKR that is going to be around independent deployments. So, I mean, right now we still have a lot of preparation work that we've done in this quarter around that, both orchestration and system. And at the same time, maybe next quarter is going to be still more preparation work that needs to be done, but it's good to start to have a shared OKR since we are going towards the same goal as our group. In addition to that, we probably still have some space for some team-specific OKRs. So please, let's start to gather some ideas over there, or maybe we can use also today to pull up some ideas and just have a brief discussion before our demo section. I added already the one-click zonal cluster reconstruction. This actually came out of a Scarbeck 101's document. He just put it there like a few weeks ago. So the idea would be to have one click or at least close to one click cluster reconstruction. Ahmad did a lot of work there, and we realized that we have some parts that are not easy to automate. Let's say that if we need to replace a cluster in the same region where we are right now, I think is actually something that is feasible, especially like the IP addresses for that need to go to HA proxy. This one is something that is still a manual action that we need to do. More blockers we found are around connectivity to Vault, and I think was the Postgres load balancer. Correct me if I'm wrong here. So this is something because our cluster that we try to build right now from scratch is actually not even in the same region of our zonal clusters. So that could be an next iteration of an OKR that we already work now, and it's gonna build definitely a great value, not only for us, but also for the disaster recovery working group that is also looking at the disaster recovery scenario. This is gonna contribute to that. And it's gonna open up to us also new ways of deploying and testing maybe new functionalities. Any other ideas on top of your mind that could come up as a possible OKR for Q4 together with a group one that we need to work together with orchestration?
There's at least two on my mind. One would be related to our current OKR where we're trying to do independent deploys. Michaela, you and I have already shared in our one-on-one. This is probably going to be a very closely shared OKR with the orchestration team. Mm-hmm. I'm not precisely sure what the language would be, but it's something that would enable us to drive closer towards enabling a target service to be independently deployed in some way, shape, or form. I think we'll have a better idea as to what we need to include for the language of that OKR after a few demos and after some team discussion as well. That's okay. One idea. The other idea I have, but I don't have this in any sort of concrete thought process, but something that we as a team have always been included on, but something we've never had a really good answer for is how to make risky changes easier, especially when they are very, very large. Think a Rails version upgrade or like a Ruby version upgrade. I created a draft issue that kind of discusses some of this a little bit, but it doesn't encompass everything yet, obviously. But I think it would be really neat if we could figure out a way to work with distribution to create a mechanism that allows us to build both Ruby versions and building a deployment mechanism that would enable us to deploy a targeted Ruby version. Let's say we're targeting just a specific Ruby upgrade. Being able to deploy a targeted Ruby version in a specific environment, and then traffic shifting between that and the old version as a way to gather some baseline information in production. I don't know how this would look like. Today we have Canary and we have a main stage. I'm thinking if we get to the point where we are able to quickly build and tear down clusters, we might have the ability to do some sort of blue-green tile intertwined with a Canary stage in order to provide the ability to deploy one-off images that contain something different from the rest. That would enable us to validate certain capabilities within our code changes. This requires a lot of thought still. It's a very immature thought, but I think this is something that will be beneficial for the development teams.
Okay, I mean, that's very definitely going to be very useful and going to bring a lot of value. So just to clarify for my understanding, the idea would be, let's say that we have a way to get, let's say, a new image based on Ruby 3 that has been tested, has been built by CNG, and we need to have a new deployment strategy where we could kind of deploy this image on a portion of an environment, let's say 50% of Canary going out with an image based on Ruby 3, right? And okay, so we are speaking about an OKR of creating a new deployment strategy to allow a more granular introduction of risky changes. Okay.
And like the ultimate goal here is that we enable dev teams to do, they're still doing feature work. Like we've got a run book for deploying something in isolation. That's not my goal here. My goal is to enable dev teams to continue developing like they currently do. They just have this magical, hey, let's test this Ruby 3 upgrade or something to that effect. That enables us to just target a very small portion of our infrastructure to run that code. But hypothetically, like specifically for a Ruby upgrade, the same code exists. It's just the difference of which version of Ruby that is running that code, hypothetically. I know there's going to be challenges with that from a development standpoint, but I think if it's at a point where it's buildable and runnable, we should have the ability to deploy it, and that would help gather the necessary feedback for dev teams to understand and better plan for larger upgrades and such. Let me try to find the issue that I created for this. Make it.
This would have to be before an MR is merged. So this would allow an unmerged MR to be tested in production, which would be good. It would be a nice feature for development.
In general, right now CNG is building the images, right? And then we'll get out of the CNG pipeline with an image based on Ruby 3. This image will have to go at least to some kind of testing on our side. Like now we are going for testing for the image we are running right now in our connected pipeline. So for how to deploy, right? And then we have like when we have QA mix test and everything. If everything goes well, then we will have the chance, we will have to have the capability of deploying a portion of an environment with that. So it means extra routing capabilities that we are probably missing right now, and have the ability probably to shift the portion of traffic. It means the number of pods running that image to be higher or lower in case we see errors. That would be probably
like maybe we take Canary and split it in two. So Canary itself has an AB or blue-green style of deployment. And like it's always on green, for example, until we have this experimental code that we want to run for the purposes of some extraneous testing. And then we fire up blue, and then blue is running alongside green for a period of time. I don't know, like just thinking out loud at this point.
Yeah, I think it's actually a good idea. It actually would allow us to introduce a lot of these very risky changes with much more confidence, right? And having the ability to switch immediately, like back and forth in the case we see error threshold like increasing, I think definitely would make us sleep a bit tighter at night when we know that next day.
Maybe here's another analogy that I think would work well. Like we've got review apps for the GitLab code base.
Mhm.
Think this as a variety of a review app that deploys that small portion of code to a very small portion of our infrastructure, but is still receiving legitimate user traffic. And can quickly be switched off if it's not performing as desired.
So having kind of review apps, but at infrastructure level, environment level, let's say. Yeah, that would be really like next step ahead. That's a very great. I think it's something that we could add some details and bring to a state where we can understand, okay, is it feasible? Where could be the first iteration out of that? Right? I didn't see the issue yet. Well, I think I saw already this issue, but yeah, I saw already this issue, definitely. But let's continue the discussion there. Yeah, Ruben, go ahead.
Another benefit I can see is that the problem with Canary that we have now is if something does go wrong, we can certainly turn it off. We can drain Canary, but then you cannot promote that and you cannot deploy anything to production until that problem is fixed. So you're kind of stuck. While with this, you test this, something goes wrong, you turn it off, and deployment continues the whole time. Nothing stops.
Yeah,
Like
agree.
because it's not yet merged, or like if we could figure that out because the code's not yet merged, we're not impacting the default branch, and that should shorten the time it takes for certain rollback procedures that we currently suffer through.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
Also, sorry.
Go ahead.
Also, is it really necessary to have the cluster build completely automated in order to do something like this? Or can we have like one cluster built and sort of disabled or something until it's required, and then you simply, but of course, if you do that, then I suppose you can only test one thing at a time.
I think
that
that
should be
boils down to how we want to route traffic around. And currently HA proxy is our method of doing that. And currently HA proxy is expecting a single cluster endpoint. So we could toy around with that idea of using like a different namespace instead of a dynamic cluster for that kind of situation. We just need to, it would be up to our tooling and capabilities. So no, I don't think having a dedicated cluster for that is a requirement. It's just one of the thoughts I had. We could probably refine that a lot more.
So a static cluster, you mean?
Potentially, yeah.
So I guess that makes it possible now without having to wait for like automated
Hypothetically,
cluster.
yeah.
We just miss the right tooling probably to switch back and forth the blue, green, and canary and understand how we want to proceed in the case of error. So try to automate that as much as possible, I guess. I mean,
providing a sane UX that enables us to manage this also.
Yeah. And also providing direct feedback back to the team without being the critical path would be probably a great outcome of this.
This is a large chunk of work.
Yeah, it is a very big chunk of work. Is the multiple OKR worth it? But I think it's a great idea that we should probably refine more, and just the moment that something like that comes into the horizon, I think, we know which are the first steps, at least, to get us closer to this target state. Definitely. Any other ideas for OKRs? I mean, we don't have to have them now. We just opened the issue now, so we can definitely continue discussion there. But definitely, let's think about that. Also, Ruben, your work around the metrics and so on. If you see any way fitting it in any of these, is definitely gonna be valuable as well. Okay. thank you for the discussion. I think we can move to the demo side. John, you want to start with yours?
Yeah, just an FYI, I keep getting my internet connection is unstable. So if I'm breaking up, my apologies.
No worries.
All right, so I wanted to showcase the work that I've done with CNG, and this is mostly discovery and documentation. And the reason why this is mostly discovery is because I had a conversation with Michele, and I can't remember how far this has been broadcasted, but the distribution team, they're busy people. I feel like if we want to make changes to the way CNG operates, we're going to have to wait a few quarters or do that work entirely ourselves and kind of hope that they've got time to review the work that we want to accomplish. Thus, what I've been doing lately is discovering how CNG currently operates, creating the necessary bits of documentation that I see missing, and then for the purposes of what we're going to do today is I'm going to showcase how it works, what our expectation is out of CNG as like the final end product for what we're trying to chase for. And then hopefully we'll have a better view as to what our expectations of what we can currently expect from CNG as it is today. So with that in mind, I'm going to share my screen. We're going to go over a few things. So I am currently on a CNG pipeline. I'm specifically using CNG Mirror. As far as I understand it, CNG and CNG Mirror are identical. CNG Mirror does not yell at people if you create a red pipeline. I got yelled at by CNG or distribution because I kicked off a pipeline on CNG. I sent the wrong variable in place, a build failed, so they got a notification that master was red. Oops. I feel like that's silly, but let's use CNG for the rest of the thought experiment. So this pipeline looks effectively, go ahead.
Sorry, just a question. So this repository is specifically for that purpose, for testing stuff?
So CNG Mirror's primary purpose is for review apps within the GitLab or GitLab codebase. I think because that gets executed, like if we go back to the pipelines, like there's millions of them. And like the majority of these were kicked off in the last, say, 10 minutes or so. Here's one I kicked off right before the meeting started. Like these are all, I guess, this gets run quite a bit. So I'm trying to avoid, interfering with, normal CNG development practices, I guess. But anyways, so CNG is divided in multiple phases. These are all leveraged, or CNG makes the use of both the Docker feature of layering and caching as much as possible. And we have taken that, or rather CNG has taken that and made it into differing phases within the build task. So all of our images are either Alpine or Debian based. So like phase 0 is, let's make sure that we could pull those. Let's make sure there's no updates, etc. And that gets cached and pushed into some sort of caching mechanism inside of GitLab, such that later images that build some of the dependencies could pull that cached image quickly. It's not having to re-pull the image, for example. That reduces the build time it takes for all these. And the same kind of repeats itself all the way down the pipeline. For everything inside of phase 2, and I think phase 3, these are all mostly dependencies that we include in all of our containers. Phase 4 is where we start seeing most of our final images. So, for example, well, I guess phase 4 and phase 5 are very similar, but like, so I'm not doing a good job. So here's an example. Back here on phase 6 is most of our final images, workhorse, the web service. These are all the common images that run inside of our pods that run, our Rails code base and Sidekick, etc. those include dependencies on, say, the GitLab exporter, because this is what processes our metrics. It also depends on GitLab logger, because this is what takes all of our logs and pumps it out in a way that Kubernetes understands it. So all these are dependencies. They all get built based on all of the upstream build jobs. So like the GitLab exporter, I believe, is Golang, so that probably depends on the GitLab Go image. GitLab logger, I think, is also Golang, so it depends on GitLab Go. GitLab Rails is where we actually build the GitLab code base, and it's obviously Ruby, so it's going to depend on GitLab Ruby, which is somewhere in here. Yeah, right here. Keep hovering over it. And then because the Rails code base is shared between the geolog cursor, sidekick, toolbox, web service, workhorse, those obviously depend on all of this to be built. So for the purposes of us today, we're trying to chase down implementing an independent deploy for, say, CAS. We don't need this entire pipeline. All we really need is the GitLab CAS. But currently, CNG is not configured to enable us to provide it a pipeline that says, only build me GitLab CAS and anything it depends on. There's just no capability inside of the CNG pipeline to do that. So some of my discovery is trying to figure out what we need minimally for us to build, say, GitLab CAS, which is quite easy because we could go and look at the Docker files and we could say that GitLab CAS depends on Golang. And there's a dependency currently on which version of Bazel we want to use for building GitLab CAS, which is specific to that component. And then we need to tell CNG which version of GitLab CAS that we want. So all of this is highly documented, but to go through this process in a demo format, we could just quickly go to triggering a pipeline. And we could say we want Golang version, and we know that the version of Golang is 1.18.6 based on what is in a specific file inside of the cluster integration repository. So I will continue to use that in this experiment. And then by default, CNG wants to build the latest version. So it's going to pick the latest commit on the default branch. In this case, that's 8v8. But I don't want to build the latest version because I want to imitate the fact that I'm probably going to build a something from my independent deploy. So like we say, hey, we've merged this, now go build this. And so I'll just copy this prior one. You know what, let's copy this one because this one has a pipeline associated with it. So we could assume that this was a green pipeline. So when we go around to initiating the build, we will probably check for that and making sure all the testing works. So we'll just go in here, and I just happen to memorize that it's GitLab as version, but it's documented. We'll talk about the pipeline. So just like I showed you before, this is going to create a massive pipeline that contains a lot of information. You know, everything after phase 4 for us, we technically don't care about for this particular component. And there are some items in earlier phases that we don't care about. I know GitLab CAS, for some reason, uses its own base image. So from a technical aspect, we really don't care about either of these base images. CAS is a Golang application, so we care about GitLab Go. And I'm pretty sure it does not do any templating by itself within the image. So I think this might be our only dependency for GitLab CAS. But we'll circle back around to what we can do with that. As far as the output goes, so this is how to trigger a pipeline. And effectively, that's all we need to send. And it's going to be very specific to that component, but that's all we need to send to CNG to tell it to build something. We go back, because I already did this once. We go back to the prior pipeline that I kicked off earlier. We'll see that GitLab CAS has completed. So I guess because we depend on GitLab Go, let's go here and see if there's anything super exciting to talk about. I don't think there is. In fact, I'm going to guess that we probably used a lot of shared or cached data simply because, really not. I've been playing around with this a lot, so I would imagine this version would have been built already, but it looks like it rebuilt at least one of our layers again. But we can see that we have, is it at this one? So we've got a specific version of Golang that was built for us here. And then the CAS image is the next thing I care about. So this would be where we would have built our custom version of CAS. Okay, so there's not really much to look at, I feel like. So let's do this. But we have our image. So we have our, where's it at? Where's the tag? This one. So we have, this is going to be our final image. So you'll notice that the SHA here doesn't really provide us any beneficial information. And in fact, that certainly does not match the version of CAS that we asked to build in no way, shape, or form. And that's expected. In order to figure out what version of CAS got built, I've requested that we add more contextual information into this job log, because I'm pretty sure if I sit here and do a search for this, we're not going to even find it inside this build log. Oh, we do. Okay, so downloading source code. So we do have a little bit of contextual information. It's very difficult to find, I will say that. So that's pretty cool in and of itself. The result for us, such that we know what to deploy, because we've got this random SHA, we probably want to try to figure out how to vectorize this in some way, shape, or form. But at the moment, we could look at our artifacts for this pipeline, and we are provided with a number of pieces of information that we could leverage here. So inside of this file, which, can I open this in browsing? I can't open it in browsing. That's fine. The only information we have in that file is the tag that was used in that job. So if I go back to the build job again, this is a simple text file that contains one piece of information, which is this right here. So we have this information available to us. So now let's go and take the results of this and figure out what things look like inside of those stock images. Oops. Share. Okay, so firstly, I want to look at Golang just because that was one of our dependencies. So I will go in here and just copy and paste what CG built. So Docker, this thing, and we'll just do the Go version. Luckily, we've created small intermediate images, so this doesn't take terribly long. But we're expecting to see Golang version 118 that something got built. And we did. So we built our intermediate image with the appropriate item that we wanted. And then lastly, we want to see which version of CAS got built. So this is from the build log. So Docker. So that's our build log, and I think I could just do that and we'll give you the version. It does. And this matches what I asked CNG to build. So we get this information out of CNG. We can validate it by running the version flag because this image just runs CAS by default. So now we know what we need to deploy from the artifacts. I'm going to stop here and see if anyone has any questions, because that was a lot to showcase.
great progress. Definitely. I mean, demo is a lot to follow, but I think we actually got to a stable point where we actually found a lot of findings on the on CNG side. Is this, do you get any support from someone from CNG directly on that, or it was just kind of
This was all discovery.
Reverse engineering the food process, kind of?
Effectively. But luckily, it's not terribly difficult to work through because their CI is very well defined.
Nice.
They've got some very well established patterns inside of CI that enables us to make it relatively easy to look at.
Great.
I had a question about the CI. So is it like you said, like CAS has a dependency on the Go job? Is that defined in the CI? So that if you go
No,
to
actually, it is not. So the assumption that CNG is making is that you're just going to build everything, which is kind of unfortunate. And I think the reason for that is probably just due to the nature of the fact that they don't have any way to say, here's a component, here's what I require. Let me dynamically build a CI pipeline for those requirements. Like they don't have any sort of, they don't have a configuration file that says CAS needs X, Y, and Z in order to have a successfully built image. That part I think is missing. And because of that, they don't know what needs to be built ahead of time. On top of that, you've got other requirements. So like the Golang intermediate image depends on, I think, probably the Debian image such that it installs all the right stuff for Golang. I don't recall if we're compiling Golang or just downloading it. But like if the upstream Debian image gets updated, or if there's like a security release for that Debian image, we want to make sure that gets updated. That way that gets fed downstream to all of our images as well. So I think it's just been easier to be like, hey, let's just build these in phases, or the various stages, and the dependencies will naturally be available to us. That's my suspicion. I think that's one of my proposed improvements for CNG is to limit how much we build depending on what we want to build. If we only want to build CAS, just give me the CAS image and build everything it depends on automatically. But something needs to tell them how to figure that information out.
One step before that could be to, even if you are building everything, you can define in the CI, you can define in the CI config file, you can define dependencies between jobs. So like,
yes.
So maybe that could be like an easier first step. Build everything, but just define the dependencies.
Yep. Are there any other questions? So as far as my future work goes for this particular issue, I'm trying to figure out what else information-wise we are missing and what other information I need to share with the rest of the team. So I think in order to close out this particular issue, I've got what I think are the necessary improvements. I'm sure there are other improvements that we could think of, but I got at least 2 in place. And I hope I tuck those in under the correct epics for the distribution team. But I've got 2 improvement issues, and I've got 3 or 4 merge requests that are strictly documentation for CNG to help us as well as anyone else who wants to contribute to CNG. Those are obviously sitting in distributions workflow for review, so I don't know when they'll actually get pulled for review, but I think that should be enough to close these issues, and then we can move on to the next step, which I'm kind of eager to work on, which would be kind of putting together some sort of POC that connects the dots of the work that we were doing earlier in the quarter, which is the metrics work, and tying that into sending information to CNG to produce a build. I've already started this. It's just a matter of kind of like showcasing what I've got so far, but I want to save that for later. So I think at this point, unless anyone has any more comments or questions, we can move on to Ahmad.
No comments from my side. Thank you. Thank you, John.
We still have time, right?
Yeah. I
Okay.
mean, I still have time. We are a bit over time, but I guess we can continue.
This is gonna be super quick. I just want to share. The workloads is it's now deployed to the fourth cluster. GitLab basically is deployed to the fourth cluster. And if I do kubectl git pods and GitLab, we gonna see hopefully soon. Yes, the workloads are now deployed. So if I do something like kubectl port forward, GitLab service web, 8080 as suggested by Scarback to show this part. And we go to localhost 8080. It redirects us to the staging of GitLab to sign in, but we can do this. We can do local host 8080. It's gonna work. It's a little bit broken. We cannot see the images. Yeah, but I mean, still, let me fetch the password quickly and see if this is gonna work. Staging. Yeah, unfortunately, it rejects the request. But anyways, all of this is on the first cluster. So the first cluster is working, workloads are there. So the next step is basically document this in a runbook and destroy everything. But actually before destroying, I mean, we can destroy actually before reconstructing this with the cluster in place, because this costs us some money and it's not like usable. It's not used by anything. So yeah. Any questions?
I have a few questions.
Yes,
so
please.
The images are not loaded because we're kind of missing the CDN in front for the content delivery.
I think no. I'm not sure actually. I think it's broken because like I get something in the logs I can show you. Let me quickly show.
HA proxy does a lot of work. Like HA proxy serves our CDN content. So more than likely what's happening is that these web requests are going to localhost, but then they don't know where to go
To find the static files. Yeah, because they are static files after all.
Okay, makes sense. And in addition to that, when you logged in, so you got a 422, so that I think is processable entity or something like that, if I recall correctly. So that one that is a 4, so is a client code, client error. So you are logging into that instance with your staging credentials, right?
Yep.
Okay. And do we know why that doesn't work? Because
I think Scarback mentioned to me today there will be some issues with CSP, I think. I'm not sure if this is it.
The
Could
CSP
be.
header?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think this could be it. I'm not sure actually also like why it gets rejected. But I assume it has something to do with the headers basically.
Okay. Okay, I guess this will only see if it works when we are going to replace a zonal cluster, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Understand. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you, Ahmad. Great progress there. Good to see it up and running.
Thank you.
Scarback.
We are over. Do you want me to save this for next time, or should we go over a short POC?
Let me see if I have time, but I think I have time. I actually have time if everyone is keen to stay also for this.
let's do this very quickly. I won't showcase like running of things. I'll just kind of showcase what things look like. So let me go and share my screen once again. Sync window. That one. Go. Okay, so I have forked the GitLab agent, therefore Scarlet GitLab agent, and I have made sure that I've made changes to only the CI configuration. So prior to what this would have looked like, we would only have the test stage and we would only have the push image stage. I added the build and deploy stages. So I created a CNG build job that depends on the testing job. The tests take, I think, upwards of 45 minutes, I think, if I recall correctly. So I've told, for the purpose of the testing, I've told test to just echo hi for me. That is enough to pass, and then we send off a build job to CNG. This is strictly shell inside of our GitLab CI, so I'm just doing a curl statement using the job API token to talk to, this is the project ID for CNG, and you can see that we are triggering a specific GitLab CAS version. We're also triggering the specific Go version, which is which I showed you all earlier. We're getting the information of that trigger, the pipeline ID, and then I'm sitting here with a giant while loop asking me, where are we on the status of this? Obviously, this needs to be improved because there's no such thing as making this work in a production-worthy manner, but for the purpose of the POC, this works. But for the most part, you know, we wait for a specific job. In this case, like I pointed out earlier, we only care about the GitLab CAS build job inside of CNG. We don't care about the rest of them. So long as that we have this, we have all the information we need to send an independent deploy. So we wait for that job status to complete. So job success, it does. And then that job writes to our artifacts. And one of those artifacts is the GitLab CAS tag. And as I mentioned to you earlier, if we just print out a part of that information, we now have which tag that we want to use for a deploy. So we have all the information we need after we built the image. That's perfect. So we save that as an artifact. So let's go back to our build pipeline. And this is just using our standard trigger. So like naturally, because I'm using an API, we get the CNG mirror job linked to that job, which is kind of cool. But I created 2 deploy jobs. These are fake, so don't worry about me accidentally breaking anything. But we're kind of doing something similar here. So we're taking, we're getting our artifacts somewhere. So there's our artifacts that we're grabbing. That way it contains the container tag that we want to use to deploy, which is that guy. And then we create a trigger pipeline that reaches out to a special project. And I'll show you this project in a second. But we're sending a few pieces of information. In this case, the CAS tag, which is up here. I'm sending what environment we're doing, which is staging. We're deploying staging, so our environment is staging. And CAS is known with a type CAS across everything, like our metrics catalog and everything. We just use the type CAS for it. And then our stage is made because there's no such thing as canary. There is, but it's not yet complete. There's no canary stage for CAS yet. So that's a work in progress. But we're doing the same thing. We're curling it and we're triggering a pipeline. And I'm doing the same exact thing where I'm looking for the status of the entire pipeline, running, and then it just completes. So let's go to that actual job, which is going to be this URL. So I've got a fake repository, in this case, test 5, because I'm very unique in my naming. And we are doing effectively a very short, quick status check, followed by a deploy, followed by checking it again. And if that check fails, we would do a rollback. But these are very quick and easy. Start health is just my naming for let's grab the health of the environment before we begin anything. And you can see here, I'm just echoing out all the variables. Just this was me validating that triggering pipelines with variables was working because I struggled with that for a little bit. But we run a shell script, which this is the same shell script with minor modifications that I worked on when I was working on our metrics issue at the beginning of the quarter. As you can see, we're getting a healthy response, and the actual response from Prometheus is this JSON object where the results of the query are effectively 1. In our case, when we get a response of 1 back on this query, that means we're in a good and healthy spot. If we were to get 0 or no value, we're not healthy. So if we go back to the pipeline, the next step is a deploy. In this case, my test repo, this actually doesn't do anything. And then finally, we do the exact same thing again that I was showing you in Start Health. We do the exact same thing for End Health. I've never seen rollback triggered because CAS is always healthy. So there's that. So that is what I've put together as a POC that only connects what work we have done in our team together so far. I'm going to start the necessary conversation. I think, Ruben, you probably saw this already. I tagged you on an issue where we want to build a greater POC that is more comprehensive. I've also tagged a few members of the orchestration team so we could start the necessary conversations and figuring out what else we need to include in that, because I know there's other stuff that orchestration wants in order to have a complete circle of things that we need to account for. Obviously, this POC here that I just showcased does not account for the fact that most of our operations happen on the ops instance. And something I would love to take advantage of, which I did not do in this POC, is leveraging larger features of GitLab CI. My thought is that we developed the necessary scripting and the CI files that are necessary for this, but they don't get maintained inside of the CAS repo. We maintain those, and they simply include them into their project for execution. Something along those lines. It's precisely how like container scanning or code scanning works today. I think I'm doing kind of the same thing. At least that's kind of like an end goal I feel like we should shoot for, because that enables us to kind of dog food our product, but we'll see how that goes. So questions on that?
Not a question, really, more like a note. I think the templates for like container scanning and such things are in the main GitLab repo. So we might need to see how we can do that such that we don't have to keep adding stuff into the main GitLab repo.
Well, the includes is a feature, so we can port it to whatever repo we want. I was simply exclaiming I'm trying to use the same pattern that dependency scanning or container scanning and code scanning works. That's all.
Ah, okay. I wasn't aware that we can point it to any repo. Okay.
Thank you.
Cool. Well, that concludes my demo.
Thank you very much, John. I think with Amy on this on the POC, as we spoke also in our one-on-one yesterday, and I think Graham is going to be the counterpart from orchestration side on this effort. So please also sync with him. But I guess you're going to be off next week, if I recall correctly. And so I guess the biggest chunk of this work will also continue like in a couple of weeks from now. And hopefully Graham will also be a bit more free and able to join you there.
Sounds good.
Anything else you want to bring up on the live stream? Well, thank you very much. That today was a very nice demo session. We went way over time. I extended our next calls to 50 minutes instead of 40 as now. So maybe, hopefully we can always go